know this was advertised. I hope no one's disappointed that I was a senior product designer at Babylist. That's not the case anymore. I, as of next week, will be starting at a painting company. This is for the young kids over here. They're deciding to get memes. There's memes and gifs because that's just who I am. Obviously, I have pink hair, so I'm not taking anything too seriously. So yeah, as of next week, so I'm excited about that. It's a very quiet week for me. I've been a product or UX designer. First off, who here looked me up on LinkedIn? Oh, few people did this. So I've been a product / UX designer. I've had my title changed several different times since about 2010. I was actually like a front-end designer, which was like a hybrid designer-developer for a few years. Before that, I was an HTML CSS specialist, so I learned the hard way that UX design doesn't make as much as developers, as we were talking about earlier, but it's a growing field and it's really exciting. I'm also a UX design instructor for General Assembly, the competitor to product school, kind of, and I do a lot of UX design mentorship in my spare time. And like I said, my husband thinks I'm pretty cool, but also a weirdo. So that's just sort of, get started. A little bit of an agenda, because I always like to know what is in here, whether we pay attention to it or not is another thing. But I always like to throw in an agenda so you can see what we're going to talk about. What is UX, or user experience? Why should you care? Balancing the proverbial three-legged stool, working with UX designers, and incorporating UX into your day-to-day product work. What do you guys think UX is, user experience design? Yeah.
More like research and try to find like pain points of users and try to make it more simple.
So research, trying to find pain points that the user is experiencing and trying to create a solution to those pain points.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I would think of like sitemaps.
Sitemaps.
And then non-visual user experience, non-visual part of the user experience.
The non-visual part of the user's experience. Interesting. Anyone else? Yeah.
This is something that I really struggle with in UX design. And it covers so much. Like, it is visual, it is research, it is product, it's everything.
It's kind of like a heavy burden. I feel like that was sometimes. I forgot I have a clicker. It's awesome. So Jesse James Garrett is pretty old school UX designer. He's kind of like one of the pioneers of UX design. Who here has heard of Jesse James Garrett? I'm looking over here because I know that you guys have probably heard of him. So he's an old school designer. Well, not old school. He's still working, but he's a pretty old school designer. He's kind of the pioneer, and he's one of the people that helped to try to define what user experience design is. And he said UX is the design of anything independent of medium or across media with human experience as an explicit outcome and human engagement as an explicit goal. So there you go, that's all it is. I'm sure that makes 100% of sense to everyone in this room, just like it did to me the first time I read it. Jesse James Garrett is a really great guy. He's someone to follow on Twitter. He has cool hair too, so, but he can be kind of wordy and a little bit academic in it. So I tried to break that down a little bit. The user experience is all of the user's interactions with a product or a service. In the tech world, that usually means their interactions with a website or a digital product of some sort, or even some devices, those sorts of things. It's always the idea of UX, even since I started 9 years ago, is always changing and kind of always evolving. When I first started, the iPhone, or when I first started my career doing HTML and CSS, the iPhone had just hit the data itself. It just kind of hit the market, and so it was kind of a new thing to even think about having essentially like a really powerful computer in your hand all of the time. And since then, now we have these ideas where they're getting smaller and smaller and thinner and thinner. A lot of people have Apple Watches. My salary doesn't really allow for it, but it's getting tinier. It's getting more ubiquitous. Maybe it will be like seamless at some point, but it's always changing. So our jobs are always kind of broadening a little bit more. And it's everywhere. User experience is everywhere, not just on the web. There's good and bad examples everywhere. Good example, the In-N-Out menu. It's simple. Do you want one burger, one patty? Do you want two patties? Do you want one slice of cheese, two slices of cheese? That's it. Do you want some fries? Of course, they have the secret menu that's kind of like the special, behind the scenes kind of thing. But it's simple, and it's been the same way since I think it's like the 60s. I forget when they came about. I just know that they're delicious. Other things that aren't so simple, I didn't know this. I just started driving. I got my license at 30, which I'm old. I didn't know all of these different lights that could appear on your car dashboard. No one told me about this. And my husband's car is notorious because it always has the check engine light on. He's like, oh, just ignore it. I'm like, but how do you know it's a problem? This one I found, I worked at like Second in Brandon for a long time, so I love this one with the ballpark taxi zone. I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is actually a little calendar of all of the game days and when you can park there and when you can't park there. And you have to pay attention to whether it's 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 4 p.m. to midnight. I don't know why this is pointing over here and this is pointing over there. But like there's, and then this is one of my favorites. Which button do you push to go up and which button do you push to go down?
Just do it then.
Yeah, it'll get there sooner or later. Just hope that you're on the first floor, right? Well, we can have it down on the first floor. I hope. You never know. So UX is everywhere. It's not just even on there. It's kind of ubiquitous. Someone designed every single one of these things, for better or worse. And I use the word design very loosely there because obviously some things don't have much design and other things have been kind of designed to death like that ballpark sign. Keep reading my finger. What I like to use as kind of a gauge for user experience design and whether something is a good user experience is this quote that I found a long time ago. I think it was written in 2010, so it predates my career even in UX. When the user asks, does this website give me value? Is it easy to use and is it pleasant to use? User experience design is all about trying to get them to think yes. I mean, no one's actually sitting there and saying, like, is this easy to use? I mean, I might, but hopefully most people aren't sitting there saying, is this easy to use? But these kind of things are the things that kind of guide me as a UX designer to kind of think about, am I doing my job correctly? But wait, if it looks good, isn't that enough? And this is kind of the inverse of, what was your name? In the back. Yeah.
Coco.
Coco?
Yeah.
So Coco had said that UX design is kind of everything that's not the visual side of it. And what I usually get is, oh, UX design has the word design in it, so if it looks pretty, isn't that enough? Not so much. The visual design and the interaction design and the interface design are kind of just the tip of the iceberg. That's what you see when you come to the site. That's usually what you're reacting to when you come to the site. But beyond that, the UX design is also inclusive of the information architecture. Some of those things that Coco was mentioning that are kind of below the surface a little bit. Information architecture, content strategy, user research, usability. It's like this broad umbrella of all of these different things that we have to kind of take into account to create a good user experience. I did not make the graphic, but I put the words on it. These are some design deliverables. These are some things that I haven't made all of these, but I've made most of these. I've done most of these. So this kind of gives you a sense of the breadth. My class, guys. This gives you a little bit of a sense of the breadth of what a UX designer might expect to do on their day-to-day kind of job. Everything from personas creation. Has anyone ever used a user persona? Yeah, awesome. Cool, you're ahead of the game. So everything from user personas to something like a pattern library or a style guide. I worked on a few of those. Especially in the past few years, it's becoming more and more common to have like this design system that you use. I heard people talking about Airbnb earlier. Airbnb is famous for design system. Dropbox has their design system. So usually the people kind of steering that in conjunction with front-end developers, the UX developers are the UX designers. Looking through this, I'd like to make this a little bit interactive. So if there's anything that you're kind of like, hey, what is that? Then feel free to ask. Yeah.
What is the difference between customer experience and user experience?
So your user is not always a customer. Your user may not actually purchase something from you. The things like when we think back to, it's mostly just nomenclature, but things like the elevator, for example, like no one's purchasing it, but there is a user experience around there. I tend to use the user experience as kind of a little bit more broad, and then specifically if I'm trying to get somebody to buy something, then I want to kind of convert them into a customer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I always ask that after I explain something. Does that make sense? It's just a tip. Yeah.
What is heuristic analysis?
So a heuristic analysis is one that I have actually not done. But usually what that will be is measuring up to some, how would I describe it? Some guidelines or kind of heuristics around how something should perform or how something should kind of work. Like you have some guidelines in place that you're kind of measuring. One of them that I would kind of, it kind of falls in the same bucket is, for example, iOS has the human interface guidelines. And so if I were doing the heuristic analysis, I would kind of think specifically about the iOS pig and see it how I'm measuring up a little bit. Like I said, I actually haven't done one of those, so I'm kind of, and it's like the word heuristic. I've probably done it and not known it, but the word heuristic is one of those that I'm like, oh, yes. Yeah.
What is the about competitive analysis report? That sounds like a little bit non-design. I mean, it sounds like something else.
So competitive analysis in the realm of UX is usually comparing like features and products and experiences. So for example, when I was at GoPro a while ago, I was redesigning their blog, essentially, like their news site where they say like, oh, here's our new athlete, and here's like the new contest that we're running or something like that. And so when I did the competitive analysis, I was looking at other blogs within the space. For example, like one of them was like Patagonia has their blog where they do very similar kind of things. And then also comparing some different kind of newsletters or blogs kind of outside the space. So one of them that was really interesting, for example, was Target. Target actually has a pretty like dense social presence within their own little blog. And so what I do with that, or what I did in that particular case, was I looked at each of those and I said, what's the taxonomy here? How are they kind of presenting their content to the user? You know, how many categories do they have, for example? What kind of features and functionality are they offering to the users? It's something that I didn't use that for the blog because it's a blog. It's, you know, kind of have, although there was does it allow commenting or not? So those sorts of things. So usually what I'm doing is breaking it down and saying, here are the different features and functions and things, and where do, kind of identifying where's our spot that we can kind of fit in. I've done this a lot with product managers specifically, or I'll go off and do it and then present it to the product manager and say, here's what I think where I think we should kind of focus a little bit. Any other questions about any of these guys? Yeah.
What's card sort exercise?
So a card sort exercise is a user research technique where, so for example, most recently at Babylist, I would present features. So for example, it's easy to return something that I don't want, or there's real parent reviews associated with the items that I see, or I can add an item from any website or any store to my baby registry. And what I did was I laid out the cards in front of the user, actually talking directly to the user. And I asked them to sort in priority order, which one's the most important to least important. It's really fun. People just love it. Once you put paper in people's hands, they just like, yes. Any others? Cool. So this just gives like a little bit of a, even as I'm describing these examples, you can kind of hear that like some of these things are very tactical and then other things are a little bit more research oriented. And then the things that everyone seems to know that we do, the sketches, wireframes, prototypes, sometimes they think we're just kind of in a closet with mood boards trying to figure out just like, what's it going to feel like? But it's actually like a pretty big spectrum of things. And along with that, we also have very different job titles. Obviously, there's a UX generalist, which is usually responsible for the whole spectrum to a certain extent. And then there's a lot of specialists that fall under the UX umbrella, especially when you get to larger companies and you start to specialize a little bit more. Going back to GoPro, for example, when I first started, we had 3 generalists, and we were responsible for the whole spectrum. When I left, we had 15 people on the team. 8 of them were generalists, and then 7 of them were specialists, kind of spread out amongst these. And what we did was we used those specialists to kind of augment some of the skills that we weren't as good at. So I'm not the best visual designer, so I would call on our visual designer and say, hey, can you look over this? I was learning a lot about user research at the time, and so I would call on the user researcher and say, hey, can you look over this research plan that I'm coming up with, this script that I'm coming up with, and give me some pointers around it. So it's a pretty broad idea. I always like to touch on that because these are all UX friends that are hanging out with me. And there's usually a couple, I'm sure that there's more titles in here too. And I've been all three of those titles, the UI UX, or UX UI, the UX designer, and the product designer. There used to also be human factors engineer and human computer interaction designers who've all been kind of lumped together a little bit. This is the slide that I love to put in, especially for product thinking people. Why should you care about the UX design? There was a Forrester survey, which I actually, or a Forrester kind of a research study that was done, and I couldn't find that actual study listed, but I found a lot of articles about it. And what they did was when they surveyed people about specifically around like the customer experience, the user experience, what they found was a poor user experience had a negative impact on the customer's willingness to pay, to convert from essentially like, you know, just a browser to the actual like purchaser. So having a good user experience increased it by 14%. It also, the stickiness of the brand was increased. So if you have a good user experience, I've seen some people wearing Allbirds. Allbirds has a pretty good user experience. You're probably not going to switch back to Nike anytime soon. And that goes for the site as well as the actual shoes. I wear Rothy's like all the time, and it's the same thing. It's a good user experience. I'm like, why would I need to buy anything else? So I just bought my 5th pair of Rothy's. So it's not a detail. And I walked by the Allbirds store and I was like, ooh, maybe I should look at Allbirds. So the stickiness is not 100%, obviously, only 50%. And then the likelihood of recommending a product goes up by 16-ish, almost 17%, just from that customer experience, that user experience. And like I said, that encompasses the whole shebang. You know, if you are spam emailing everybody, probably not going to hit these numbers. If you're, you know, if your shoes aren't actually comfortable when you put them on, you're probably not going to hit the numbers. But if you're really pouring a lot of your resources into the user experience, then you can expect to see some pretty good gains. Like I said, this is my product. I'm like, look, product people, love us. So balancing that three-legged stool. This is where we get into kind of a lot of team dynamics. There's this thing called lateral team design, and again, thinking about Airbnb, they're kind of like leading the forefront on this, but I'd like to say that I was doing this before Airbnb was talking about it, but overall, it's important to remember that the product managers, user experience designers, and engineering, or product design and engineering, all shape the user's experience in some way. I've given this talk to, or a similar talk to engineers before, and they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, if your code is bad, then my user experience is bad, so I'm not going to use it. If there's a lot of bugs, if it's really slow, all of these different things. With the product, a lot of it is going to be about if you're building the wrong features at the wrong time, or if you're building features that don't have that good product market fit, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. You're going to have an impact on the UX as well, a negative impact. You can always have a positive one too. When we all work together, then you have the greatest impact. And that brings me to the three-legged stool. So the three-legged stool is kind of an idea that's been around for a little while. And again, Airbnb, they kind of beat everybody to the chase, where they have the loudest megaphone, and so people start to listen to them now. So the three-legged stool is the idea that as we're building a product, the product is only as good as those three sections that I mentioned a second ago. Design, engineering, and product management all working together kind of lift up the product. So when we think about a three-legged stool, it can't really stand if it's got one leg shorter than the other. It's going to be wobbly. The product's not going to be very good. When the three are kind of growing together and working together, that's when the stool is at its most stable. If it's not, if there's not design, for example, or the user experience isn't taken into account, or if if any of these are not taken into account, but specifically for my purposes, when design is not taken into account, or design isn't kind of kept in mind as strongly as the other two sides, then the stool falls over. It's not stable. The product's not as good as it could be. I'm sure that we've seen some examples of this. Let's say, actually, probably like Microsoft tools. Sorry if anybody works at Microsoft, but especially maybe 5 or 6 years ago when it was just like toolbars on toolbars on toolbars on toolbars, and so many different kinds of features and everything. Even Adobe products were starting to get into this. Yes.
I think a particularly good example, although the Microsoft ribbon is a good one as well, was Google Wave. In terms of having fantastic functionality, being a really well-built product, but nobody could understand the UI.
Yeah.
Or really, it was so bad it was to the point where you really couldn't even understand what the purpose of the product was, even though it had all these great features in it.
Yeah. And I think another one is even Google Plus, not really kind of taking into account, not even like the design side of things, but like the the user experience, like who is our user? Not knowing who your user is can be really detrimental as well. And then Adobe is one of my favorite examples. It wasn't until recently when Sketch and Figma and all of these kind of startups started to kind of eat away at their business that they're like, hey, maybe we should really invest in really figuring out who our users are. And so Adobe XD, Experience Design, was created out of that, specifically because they were like, you know who we need to target? User experience designers. It's like, yeah, we've been slaving away in Photoshop for so long. But Google Wave is a good one too. For the young folk in the audience, can you explain what Google Wave was?
Yeah, sure. So Google Wave was positioned and promoted as a kind of follow-on product to Google Docs. The idea was that you could all collaborate finally in a document in real time, and it would have the power to not only see a product at its present, but also the timeline to how that product came to be. And the idea would be that this would lead to more effective collaboration. The fact that Google Wave is not online today tells you that it didn't really come out that way.
It's gone to the hall of misfit toys. So keeping the balance. This is actually a team I worked on for design systems with the GoPro. So this is me, my natural hair color. Sorry guys, I don't do that anymore. Strategy, experience, and feasibility. The three kind of wheelhouses for the three-legged stool for product design and engineering specifically should be kind of weighed against each other. What should we build? What can we build? And when should we build it? We should always be having conversations about this. So, like I said, this is speaking of conversations, get in a tiny room, or this was like a phone booth that we kind of crammed into, and talk it out. Like, that's my best advice for like balancing with open communication. So we did have a scrum master, so she made sure that we didn't talk too long. But you can see, like, I kind of labeled who's like design and engineering for that kind of thing. And our design system worked out pretty well. Yes.
So I understand the importance here of having conversations within the whole functional team developing the product, but from like the side of having conversations with the customer, people who are going to use it, do you have any recommendations, and hopefully I'm not jumping ahead and maybe something else you might got, but like versus, you have a focus group versus having like one-on-one discussions, and how do you measure like the difference between quantitative comments about a product, like maybe a 1 to 10 scale, versus a qualitative about, i.e. what I'm looking for and what values most to me?
Yeah. So I'm going to put a pin in that one,
Sure.
and we'll come back to it. Either if I don't address it in the talk, then let's definitely talk about it like during the Q&A too.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I have lots of thoughts about that one. So the easiest way to kind of keep that stool of balance is to have a conversation. When I was at GoPro, we were working in these teams, which we had heard about it from Spotify. Spotify kind of came up with the guild, where it's usually product manager, UX designer, sometimes a scrum master, and then anywhere from 3 to 5 engineers, sometimes 7 if we get a little heavy. Working in a small squad, working on a particular initiative within the company or within the product to kind of move things forward. And what really worked really well was the product manager and the UX designer being best friends, kind of hanging out all together. I gave an example of a conversation. So for example, one of these conversations that might happen, the product manager says we need to increase our activation rate to hit our revenue goals. This is one that I just had at Babylist. Our activation rate is at 20%. What can we do to get it to 25%? I did some research. I went and talked to users and said, here's why they're not activating. They don't really understand the value proposition. They're not seeing the value proposition. Babylist specifically had 3 different sections of their kind of offering. They had the baby registry. They had an e-commerce store where you could buy a lot of the products that we would recommend, and then we also had an editorial link where you could learn about, well, how do I pick a stroller or something like that? What do I need to add to my baby registry? And what we saw was the users didn't understand that those 3 things were connected. Some of them had heard of one of the sections, and some of them had heard of another, and they just kind of weren't seeing all together. So I said, this is what we need to do. Like, this is where our users aren't activating. They know that, we're a universal registry, but they don't know that we carry a lot of these great products that we also recommend in our editorial content. So going from there, I talked to the product manager. It was actually a lot more than 2 sprints for this particular project that I'm thinking of. But the product manager will say, okay, this is how long we can allot for it. We need to do something within these 2 sprints. I say, okay, here's some things that we could do. Kind of brainstorm, sketch some things out, get on a whiteboard and scribble everywhere. The engineering team kind of comes in and says, okay, well, this is what we'll actually be able to build in that time frame, and here's what we need to do in order to support that. Like, we need to create these new API endpoints. We need to do this, and we need to switch to one of them was we need to switch to a different email provider because our email provider wouldn't be able to scale with what we anticipated. So having this conversation can kind of lead you to a really great place. This is one example, like I said, of a pretty typical conversation. And it doesn't have to be all of the engineers in the room. It can be like one engineer, like a tech lead or something like that. Whenever I say, like, oh, get everybody in the room, when I've given this kind of talk to developers, I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody. It doesn't have to be you. Elect somebody and let's talk. This is another one that I threw in specifically for the product team. Sprinting together. Everyone talks about, like, oh, should designers be a sprint ahead? Should they be 2 sprints ahead? Well, how far ahead should the product manager be thinking? Like, how should we kind of do this? And the way that I kind of think about it is, like, no one's like a full sprint ahead. Like, when the engineering team, I like to map it out on the engineering sprints, but when the engineering team is working on sprint 1, I've already thought about it a little bit, but I forgot to label this. So this is supposed to be the product, this is the design, and then this is engineering. Sorry. So product has already thought about it for a little while and is kind of identifying, like, here's how much time we needed and here's where we need to focus. I've already started thinking about it, doing some research. I'm designing things alongside some of it being developed. And start while the sprint development is happening for whatever feature we're working on, the next sprint is kind of bubbling up in my mind. But and this is a very simplified diagram. It never works like this. This is like pipe dream, and this would be amazing. But it's kind of the idea that, like, because a lot of you are product people, you're thinking of like 2 or 3 sprints ahead. Engineering's working like 2 or 3 sprints. In the moment, and design is kind of in that in between space. So it's there's no perfect answer. It never, like, everyone can argue for days and days about, like, how many sprints ahead should design and product be. It never really works, but I think it's important to say you're never like a full sprint ahead. Like, I don't design everything, hand it off, and run away. Like, design and then support and QA and then run. No, and then work on the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off of what you're talking about here, but the screen before, and I think the screen here kind of suggests, like, here's the ideal situation, right? And they've all kind of come to an agreement. We can spend 2 sprints.
Right.
Here's what we can design, and here's what we can functionally engineer.
Yeah.
What is the recommendation when there is a mismatch in terms of what people believe the actual realistic outcomes can be? Because obviously there's like a given hierarchy within the company usually, unless you're like a Zappos on those positions. So somebody theoretically has more decision power to make that, but it might not be like the best decision overall. So how do you kind of address that and ensure that everyone gets on the same page about what's
Yeah.
accomplished?
So going to the what you said about like there's kind of the expert or like the person that makes the decision. Each of us within these three functions has the decisions to make. So the product team is making the decision on behalf of the business and saying like this is where we need to focus, and this is kind of the timeline or like the roadmap. I know that it's usually a little fuzzy, especially with like true agile, true Scrum, where it's like the backlog is forever. The UX team is speaking for the user and saying, well, this is what the user needs and this is what we need to do for the user. And then engineering is kind of, coming in and saying, like, this is what we can actually feasibly build. So I think it's about, I'm a little bit of a socialist in that I'm like, smash the hierarchy, but it's also a little bit of like, we've all been hired to do our specific jobs and we've all been hired as the subject matter expert for that. So as much as we can, it's kind of trusting the others to make the decisions and kind of coming to a compromise. And I know that's like not an easy answer. It's like the Mr. Rogers like feels good answer, but it's also like in the end, I'm a big believer in like within that little squad, there's actually not that much hierarchy.
Sure.
Makes sense.
So what is the after you do like the user testing or and for the research and then you come up with the best design that you think that works for all the customers, but developers say that sorry we cannot build it. So what kind of things?
Yeah. So the question was, what if you come up with this design that you're sure is going to be like perfect design, and engineering is saying we don't have time to build it, or we can't build that, or product is saying we have to work on other things. We don't have enough time to do all of this. So there's a couple things. The first thing is I always try to push back and compromise and say, well, what can we build? I'm like I said, everyone should trust each other when we're working together, like Mr. Rogers and a socialist. So being able to kind of have that conversation and say, like, what can we build? There's been plenty of times where I've said, okay, this is like my pie in the sky, what I would love to design. Let's break it down into sprints. Let's do some long division behind it and say, like, okay, well, this is what we'll be able to build first. Let's prioritize the things that are going to have the biggest impact. I'm sure that if you're product managers or have studied any kind of product, you've seen the level of effort versus impact kind of graph, and you're always focusing on the top two quadrants. I whip that out sometimes. I'm like, let's do it. Like, get some post-it notes, write down what we need to do, and start prioritizing. And I think that's where the product manager can really come in and play a huge role, is be like, to kind of get input from engineering and from design and say, what are the things that we actually need to build and in what order? But it's another one where it's just not. It's not going to be like super happy rainbows where it's like, oh, you're right, let's do this. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, sir.
Sorry.
so if I look at the three unique, responsibilities that the three groups have, if I'm not wrong, I think it was like Google, they started requiring PMs to have engineering experience. Like you mentioned that you had computer science experience as well.
Yep.
So in general, within this ecosystem, is computer science a prerequisite for all three groups, or do you find it completely okay to not?
Yeah, I don't think it's so. Some of the best UX designers I've worked with were actually architects before. We had no computer. I actually love architects that convert to being UX designers because they kind of think about things in a very similar way. And I think that there's a lot of product managers that also don't come from a tech background. I think to expect everyone on the team to have all of that is to be looking for unicorns. And I say that realizing that I have not a CS background, but I was a CSS HTML specialist, so I have a little bit of that. I know how to use Git, which not every UX designer has. I think that there's something to be said for kind of understanding each other's language. So learning a little bit of the basics. I encourage most designers to learn a little bit of HTML CSS so that they have a little bit of the basics behind it. But as far as like, does everyone need to take CS classes? I don't think so. I think it is a good start for like the product managers that are here tonight to kind of like get a peek into that and kind of keep things in mind. But again, that's a little bit of like the social Mr. Rogers kind of thing where it's like, if we all understand each other, then we'll all love each other. Like that, yeah. Don't go chasing unicorns.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what are, for example, if you're a product designer, when you're working on a project, how is your KPIs defined? And how can that be different from other groups?
Actually, I think I had well, I'll get to that in just a second. Yeah. I spoiled it. Oh man, I always spoil it. So a little bit about working with UX designers. We're not so different, you and I. We have a lot of the same things in mind, and this is where I was. This is specifically around what you were thinking about and what you're talking about. Coming up with the KPIs, I think traditionally it's been like that product manager kind of idea, or like handed down from the executive like leaders and said, this is where we're focusing. Then product will kind of say like, okay, here's like our actual numbers to hit. And different companies kind of feel differently about like bringing UX to the table. I always, obviously, it's in my best interest to kind of try to get UX in the room when we're roadmap planning, but it doesn't always happen. And part of that is like defining KPIs and things like that. So UX usually, sadly, doesn't get much of a say in the KPIs, but unless they're like user based, we want our net promoter score to go up when you turn it on or something. I would like for it to happen. Yeah.
But I think one thing you can do, and you touched on this a little bit earlier. The question was asked about if we don't have time in the sprint to get a functional UX component placed in. Well, if you can go to the KPIs and say, here is a demonstrable way that my component is going to impact the KPIs, you have a better chance of getting it in. Not only that, you can tie it into what you talked about, where it's helping the specific KPI, and it's going to be in our top 2 quadrants.
Yeah.
So let's find space for it in the sprint.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, it's always like a conversation a lot of people take. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just curious. So, your company, or I guess in the past experience, like what kind of dialogue do you guys have with the sales?
With sales?
Yeah.
It depends on the company. With the company I was at before, Babylist, a lot of times we had to have a pretty heavy dialogue with sales because they would promise things that we were like, why would we ever design that? So, or like we can't design that or we can't build that. So I think it's one of those like it depends questions. I think it is good to, as much as possible, have that kind of like discussion between the two. That kind of pipeline, so that sales doesn't overpromise. Is there like something in particular? Like,
Well, I wanted to hear your experience.
Yeah.
Right. So, with Babylist, what were some things that were overpromising that could not be done?
specifically at degree, and maybe actually I'm going to put a pin in that and let's talk about it during the Q&A just so I can make sure we get through the rest of it. But that's yeah, and it gives me a little bit of time to think of a really good example. I have one, but I have to remember it. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap between the roles of a product manager and a UX designer. There's a lot of things that both sides do that the other side also kind of takes a look at. Some ideas of things to do good. This is one of my product managers for BFFs. A lot of the things that I see that I always feel like I want the product manager to be alongside me with, specifically around user research. I want them to be involved in usability testing as much as possible, even if it's not necessarily like being in the room when I'm doing the usability testing, or like sometimes my Babylist, my product manager, would set up his own usability test, which was fantastic. He would have me look over it and be like, all right, let's go. Brainstorming, of course, we want to kind of do together. This is a design sprint where the product managers and designers at Echo Pro were kind of put in a room and said, like, go for it, like figure out what we're going to build. And then requirements gathering, I like to kind of be a collaborative exercise too, to say like, I'm gathering requirements from the users. You're going to gather requirements from the stakeholders. Let's meet in a room and figure out that matrix again. Yeah, so they should be BFFs, but even BFFs need their space. And this is not a hard and fast line. I don't want to be like, never design it, never put any visual design. Like, there's a little bit of flexibility. But in general, like UX responsibilities, or like, we talked about like the subject matter expert or the person that has to understand it. On the visual and interaction and user journey mapping and information architecture, like those historically like UX and designy kind of things, that's usually where it's like, okay, like I'm gonna go off and do this for a little bit and bring it back to you. And I had to look up a little bit of the product management stuff because I have only done like Scrum product management, not like the budget and resource analysis. I'm like, budget is nothing, let's spend all the money. As long as the user is happy. There's definitely product responsibilities where the UX doesn't kind of factor in, and most of those tend to be around like keeping the business running, keeping the lights on, that sort of thing. But wait, what if I don't have a dedicated designer? Does anybody work in a company where they don't have a designer, or they don't have a full-time designer on their team or squad? Or everyone else has a designer?
No.
Then this one's just for you.
Pretty much.
Just kidding. So how to incorporate UX into your day-to-day work as a product manager? First of all, keeping users always on your mind. These are some of those methods that I mentioned, and I wanted to give you some tools that I've used that are really great for these kind of things too. So that upfront user research, even if it's just going, when I was at GoPro, we were actually working in the mall on Market Street, and we actually went down to the Adidas store and just like did some guerrilla user testing. Like, how do you feel about GoPro? It's rad, man. So stoked. Usability testing, specifically on usertesting.com and Soundingbox. These are two of them that I've used in the past that are pretty good for this kind of thing. Usertesting.com is the behemoth. They do probably have like most of the market share of usability testing. User recordings is the hot topic lately, kind of one of those things where people are like, wait, you're watching me? I'm like, I've been watching you. But the idea of like, that kind of anonymized data where you can see like the mouse moving around on the, you can learn a lot from that. And I've heard some people that are like, well, you're just watching them. Like, how do you know what they're intending? You can see when someone hovers and then is like, I don't know if to click there. So like being able to watch user recordings, as kind of creepy as it is kind of a fun thing. Heat maps are a good way if you don't feel comfortable watching the user. Heat maps can kind of aggregate all of the user's data together and say like, these are the things that people are clicking on, this is how far they're scrolling, that sort of thing. And then a favorite at Babylist is A/B testing. I don't know, I'm not the biggest fan of A/B testing, but I'm just kind of old school. So, yeah.
Don't you feel like kind of like A/B testing can end up getting you to like a local minimum if it's problems, or a local maximum if it's like how you want to optimize it, instead of like seeing a broader range of options that can improve the product?
Yeah, I have a lot of issues with A/B testing, and that's one of them. Is like, yeah, and then there's usually not like that why. Like I'm always asking why.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we see that one's performing better than the other, but why? Like, yeah. So, like I said, no, I could, give me a couple glasses of wine and I'll tell you all about what I think about A/B testing. But I'll do it.
What is Hotjar? Sorry.
Oh, so Hotjar and Specular are specifically like user session recording. Hotjar also has funnel analysis and heat maps too. I love it. It's my favorite. And Specular is one that I'm not as familiar with, but was offering user recordings. There was a big kerfuffle about like 3 or 4 months ago about people realizing that they were being recorded and not being very happy about it. Yeah. Sorry. The big thing to remember is it's not just about how it looks. This is a parable that I like to tell. Does anybody recognize what this building is? What was that?
Horizon?
No, this is the Disney Concert Hall down in LA. This is my UX parable. So gather around, children. I'll tell you my UX parables. Frank Gehry is the architect of the Disney concert hall down in LA. He wanted to make a statement piece that would really stand out in the LA architecture. LA architecture is pretty crazy, so he wanted something that's really going to stand out and be a statement piece for LA architecture. So he designed this like gorgeous, like sweeping concert hall. It's made to mimic the feeling of music and everything. And he, they built it and everything. And suddenly, people started complaining because when you're driving on the freeway near the concert hall, you get blinded when the sun reflects off of it. There were people that were living across the freeway where their apartments became like microwaves because it was reflecting sunlight into their apartments. So they spent, I think it was, I had the number on here, but it was $900 million, I believe, just to sandblast the whole facade so that it would stop shining the light into people's faces. And while it's not exactly, like a UX kind of design parable, I think it's something to keep in mind. Is like, it can be gorgeous, but then if it like burns people up, like it's not good. Like, yeah.
Well, and I think it's an even better example than you let on because it also failed its primary job as a concert hall. They spent millions of dollars rehabbing it because sounds did not reflect the way that they were meant to.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that if you talk to, if Gehry had talked to like a sound engineer, he would say, when you have all of these curved surfaces, all of the sound's going to bounce in different ways and be in kind of like different weirdness. So sometimes like it's the old like form over function. What are you trying to do? Who are your users? Who lives across the freeway? That kind of thing. It's about how it works. I'm sure everyone has used this app. Raise your hand if you've used this website. It is atrocious. Visually, it's like it hasn't changed since it first launched, basically, maybe a couple little things. And obviously, like, it's overwhelming. But everyone uses it, and it's not going anywhere because you put the function over the form. It works for the users that are using it. It's ubiquitous. Like if I say, oh, just put it on Craigslist, you're going to do that rather than like, oh, actually, I'm going to put it on Facebook Marketplace. No, you're going to put it on Craigslist. It's just, So this is a user experience success kind of idea, and it kind of shows that the visual side of it is an important part of it, but it's not the most important part of it. I remember this is the simplified version of that quote. Does this give me value? Is it easy to use, and is it pleasant to use? Alright, Q&A. Mario walked in, so I know it's time for Q&A too. So, okay, you have to remind me of the questions that we had that I put a pin in. Yes.
I'm wondering if you could give any advice for people who are transitioning their career into this space.
Yeah.
And me specifically, I find my experience traveling both UX and product, and it's really amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I think this presentation helped clarify a lot of questions.
Yeah, awesome.
Me to think more on my UI and more on UX.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just curious to know, like, what advice would you give to someone who might have broad skill set that covers both?
Yeah, I think and I saw this for a while, like transitioning from the development side of it to the design side of it and touching code less and less. I would say that it's unless you do like a rapid change of jobs, it's probably not going to be an overnight kind of thing. And for me, at least with the development side of it, it took me a long time to kind of like shut off that. I mean, it's not shut off completely, but to kind of silence that side of my mind. So I think that's just words of wisdom. It's not going to be easy. I think that, have you done any like boot camps or anything, or have you considered any of those?
I've looked at that.
Yeah, I've heard mixed reviews. Not yeah.
I haven't enough skills to do this work.
Okay, yeah. I think it's just about like kind of pushing forward and saying like I'm gonna do it. I mean, if you have like specific things that you're trying to turn off, and hypnosis maybe. But it's the good thing is that like product and UX are so like closely aligned. There's a lot of overlap, so that you can gradually kind of move from it. Yeah, I don't know if that's reassuring or not. I hope so.
So for the two buckets of like B2B and like B2C products and services, like is your process and like your priorities or goals like different? Like if you're doing one or the other?
It's mostly just the user is different. When I worked in B2B, a lot of times it's like, okay, I have two users almost. Like I have or like enterprise, especially like enterprise SaaS and B2B. You have the person that's buying it and saying like, okay, we're going to implement this, and then you have the end user that actually has to put up with it and has to use it. So when I was at Degree, which is an enterprise learning platform, a lot of times, there would be, especially talking with the sales team, there would be a focus on we got to get them to buy, we got to get them to sign the contract, and it's kind of like, well, is it like it's one of those moral dilemmas where it's like, okay, we can do this to make the sale, but at the same time, like, what if their users don't use it? Like, are they going to renew later? Like, they might buy us for a year, but are they going to buy us? Are they going to renew after that first year if our UX isn't very good? So I think that the big difference is just like who that end user is, or if there are multiple users. It's almost like, developing those personas and saying, here's my persona of like for us it was like the chief learning officer versus, Joe who works in accounting kind of idea. So they're all users in the end. Yeah.
And when you throw people in the room, like you talked about, how often does the topic about increasing revenue come into play, or does it not?
It depends on the company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like for the GoPro blog, did it come up?
Yeah, that was more of an editorial kind of thing, so it wasn't really about the revenue. Whereas when I worked on e-commerce stuff, it was like.
And then Babylist.
Babylist, it's come up a little bit, but I was mostly focused on like the registry side of it, which it was focused on more on activation because activation brings the revenue, so it wasn't like.
What is activation?
For us, activation was a user has had one item. Like it depends on the company, but an activated user has had one item purchased from their baby registry kind of thing. So, yeah, it depends on the company what activation is. Engagement, they have those definitions basically. Yeah. Well, there's lots of questions over here. Yeah.
So from the design perspective, thank you. From the design perspective and in working with product, from your end, how do you balance kind of the business goals with what you're hearing from your users, and how do you efficiently communicate between kind of the product realm and UX when you're at odds with maybe the business goals of the user needs?
Yeah. So a lot of times, I'm kind of the kind of designer where if I see that kind of tension, I'll actually go to the users and try to like dig a little bit more deeply. So when I was at GoPro, another one that I was working on was a user-generated content submission kind of site. And the idea was, the goal was, let's get as many photos and videos submitted to GoPro as we can from our users, because then we, recycle them and use them for our advertising. I'm sure you've all seen GoPro ads. There was a huge billboard, and after I stopped working there, I kept seeing the billboards, and I was like, stop. And so when I was initially faced with that kind of, idea, I was like, okay, well, as a user, I probably want to be inspired to, submit some videos. So for each of these like individual contests, essentially, that we have to get people to submit, I said, okay, well, as a user, I want to see the recent entries that have been submitted. I want to see what people are submitting, so I can say like, oh, that's really cool, I want to try that, or I can do better than that, I'm going to submit mine, kind of thing. I presented it to the stakeholders who were more on they weren't even like the product sellers, like, it was a, GoPro corporate, essentially. And they said, oh, no, we're not going to show the recent entries. And I said, well, what do you mean, what are we going to show? And they said, we're going to show like the best of the best. And I, as a user, or like thinking from the user, I'm saying, well, if I go in here and I see like the best of the best, aren't I going to be like kind of intimidated? Like, am I going to want to submit? So I actually did like a quick like user research kind of study where I had users either look at some photos or watch some videos and then tell me how likely they would be to actually submit their own photos and videos. And these were GoPro users, and it was qualified to like a specific audience. And then I also asked them, because one of the arguments was, well, we're going to, they could win money, so of course they're going to submit even if they feel intimidated. Well, let's ask. And what I found out actually was that I was correct in that they would be intimidated. I still got overridden, and so it launched with the best of the best instead of the recent entries. And so it was one of those battles where I lost, but that's the thing that I try to do is like if it's kind of one of those things where it's like it's going head to head, it's like, well, I don't know, product manager doesn't know, let's ask the users. And there's a lot of variety of different small tests that you can do. Like I said, throwing up some photos and videos and saying, watch these and tell me what you think, kind of thing. Yeah.
Do you have some insight into why you were overwritten in that case? Was it like the image of GoPro?
It's it's the GoPro like brand basically. Yeah. And I mean the product overall was successful. You know, I don't remember what our goal of number of submissions was, but within 10 months we had 1 million submissions. So I'm like, you know, maybe it's not that big of a deal. But I'm like, there's always that like doubt in the back of my mind where it's like, could we have had 2 million? Probably only would have been like 1.2 or something, but you know, it's.
How do you handle moments like that when you have like really strong evidence and you're just like, sorry, no, like,
Yeah.
how do you respond?
It's hard. I mean, I've gotten better at it. I will say that I probably wasn't so great at it at GoPro. I got pretty angry about it. But lately it's kind of like, you know, maybe I lost this battle. The next one's on the horizon. Like, yeah. You can't lose them all, right? You can't win them all, but you also can't lose them all.
So, if you're a resource constrained startup,
Yeah.
which of these 5 do you think is the most important? Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I think that there's things that you can do for each of them. So, for example, there's like, you know, user personas. Generally, it requires tons of research interviews, you know, a lot of like synthesis within the research interviews. You probably want to interview 10 plus like users up front. But there are ways to create like what we call proto personas, where it's like this is kind of our best guess idea, and it's at least keeping a user in mind. So it may not be like 100% defined, like this is our user. But it's kind of like, you know, and some of them kind of shake out just as you're talking to, you know, the rest of the company. At Babylist, like, we never really had time to do, like, the full persona exercise. But it was kind of like, when I talk about Babylist, there's a person creating a baby registry, and there's a person giving gifts on the registry. That's already, like, 2 proto-personas. And you can kind of break them down by, you know, socioeconomic kind of stuff. But, yeah. I think for most of these, there's at least something that you can kind of make a stab at. Whether you're going to run a focus group as a resource-constrained startup, probably not. But you could put something on usertesting.com or Sounding Box and say, like, I'm going to talk to some users, even if it's not like all in a room. And, you know, I've done 1 focus group. So it just depends. I'm hoping to do more. I'm going to be working at a big company, so yeah, you're like losing feeling in your hands.
What method do you prefer for UX, and what should I ask my portfolio?
It's hard to hear you, sorry. It's air conditioning.
I have the question.
Yeah.
What method do you prefer for UX, like KPH or the prototype?
Oh.
Oh, and another question is what should I ask my portfolio?
What's the second one?
What should I ask my portfolio?
Oh, okay. The portfolio. So
Yeah.
the portfolio one, case studies.
Case study?
Yes. I don't want to, like, I've done some hiring too. I don't want to just see, like, your beautiful finished designs. I want to see all the dirty work
You
that
want
you have to
to step by steps.
Yep. I want to see your sketches. I want to see your wireframes. I want to see, like, that dirty napkin that you, like, put some stuff on. I want to see pictures, like, if you, like, for me, I have on, I haven't put it on my portfolio yet, but when I was presenting case studies, like, when I was interviewing, I had photos of me talking to users. Like, I want to see, like, that behind the scenes work. And then as far as, like, methodology, are you speaking of, like, prioritization? Like,
When you find a software users.
So I tend to follow the essentially like the Stanford D School process, combined with like this idea of like it's what do they call it? I keep thinking fit and flare, but that's like a dress style. But it's like a necktie kind of model where it's like how broad do you go and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's the succinct answer. D School. Yeah.